Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dave Heischel. I'm the president and CEO of Eagle Technologies. Today I have Anthony Schweitzer and Patrick Mann from Eagle helping with this presentation. This is our second in a five-part series, I believe, on 30 minutes to cyber resiliency. And we're partnering with Commvault. Today from Commvault, we have Christopher Hill and Tim Collins assisting with the discussion. So with that, I'll get it kicked off. We do try to keep these to 30 minutes. I do encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A chat. First, a quick introduction to some of the folks that don't know Eagle as well as others, but we take a little different approach to everything we do. We are a value-added reseller, but for us, it's really about the overall design, and this defense in depth is something, or always considering security and recovery, I should say. But really, it's the defense in depth. Everybody's heard of layers of the onion and so forth. We take that to all of the infrastructure in the data center and really build a solution around data resiliency and security and that recoverability of that data. So, recovery in depth goes hand in hand. The big piece of the puzzle is how we design. So we're not just taking parts off the shelf and trying to glue them together. We look at how parts work together in a better solution overall. So that's really the go-to market that we've put together. We've just celebrated our 44th birthday, so congratulations to all the Eagle team and happy birthday. I didn't get anybody any cake, but we'll celebrate somehow in some way. So with that, I will probably ask Anthony and Patrick to help kick it off. You can see all these young faces out here. None of us look this way anymore, by the way. You can tell on camera that we've all aged a little bit. We probably need new headshots at some point. But I'm the president and CEO. Patrick and Anthony are both solutions architects. And when time comes, Tim and Christopher will introduce their roles within Commvault. In fact, let's do that now. Christopher, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, and Tim, and do a quick introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And I've been working with Eagle for a couple of decades now, so it's great to see everyone out here still. And happy birthday, Eagle! I Christopher Hill, lead the pre-sales engineering team in the Americas for Commvault's SaaS division. We'll be talking about some of the product set from that today and its impact on the cyber resilience space. Really happy to be here, and happy to be here with my partner in crime, Tim Collins. Tim.
And I'm Tim Collins, and I'm one of the senior engineers that focuses on SaaS at Commvault, and I work with Christopher Hill as well.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Appreciate the help. We've been really fortunate. As they mentioned, we've worked with Commvault for a couple decades now, and it's allowed us to pull in these subject matter experts like Tim and Christopher for events like this to really get in the weeds on some of these topics. So with that, let's kick it off, if you wouldn't mind. So I'm going to pass the baton pretty quickly, but we are all about that data resilience and recovery, and this is a shocking number to me. The average recovery time without the proper tools, and we'll be talking about Cloud Rewind with Commvault, but it's 24 days, and that's amazing to me. And you don't think about that in a traditional data center, but there are different dynamics, obviously, in the cloud. And I don't know, Anthony, you want to kind of go into some of the challenges of why that 24 days is a legitimate number?
Yeah, the cloud is very different than a data center where you have a rack, power, internet's provided. There's a lot of things that are, I guess things that you're not typically protecting, not thinking of. Cloud typically has been stood up by Shadow IT in the past. And so it might be a different division doing things. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You also have, single people being the cloud providers or cloud admins doing scripting and things like that, that is outside of the purview of the data protection team or the enterprise team at large. There's a lot of factors that go into this. And yeah, we'll touch on a lot of that of how we can protect from different scenarios.
Yeah. Anthony, I'd add to that as well, I think, and you summed up some of the key pieces there, but there are three foundational elements. One is, as people have moved to the cloud, there's a tremendous amount of process complexity, just people, process, and products. Even with the hyperscalers, if you do cloud native backup, for example, in AWS, you're doing a different backup product for every foundational product that AWS sells. So it gets very complex very quickly, and that's exacerbated by some of the other attack vectors like Active Directory being a prime mode of attack. If you're moving on-prem into the cloud, supply chain is really hard on-prem. It should be easier in the cloud, but the complexity still presents real challenges there.
Yeah,
Yeah, great
good
points.
points.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to talk about all the time, it's all about the data. Dave, do you remember that? We probably even have Commvault branded socks that say something similar to that.
Yep,
It used to be all
absolutely.
about the data, right? We used to recover data and we were good. But in the cloud situation, there's the whole infrastructure piece. It's not just the data. We need to recover all these interdependencies as well. So that's what's taking so long, right? It's not about recovering data. It's about recovering the infrastructure and making it usable again.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of things are set it and forget it. You might have figured something out 5 years ago on a setting. Maybe it's changed over time and there's been some scope creep, but like none of that has been typically documented. It's I checked this box, things started working.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
we've had a lot of discussions. To be that all about the data is key. You know, I always have said that it's about the data, but more importantly, it's about giving users access to that data, right? It's if I can recover the data, but the users still don't have access to it, that's not great.
Right.
We used to have this sign or this slide that basically was data and users, and in between was a ton of plumbing parts. And Christopher made a great point. If you have multiple tools are required to do these recoveries, the complexity starts adding to that time of recovery as well, which is not conducive to that business continuity that everybody's trying to get to, that lower recovery point objective or recovery time objective rather.
Yeah. Yeah. So now finally 7 minutes into this, I think Dave, you did mention that we are talking about Cloud Rewind. That's really helpful. But here's the slide, right? We're talking about Commvault Cloud Rewind. And what is that? And it's that cloud native cyber resilient solution. The time machine, right? I'm a child of the 80s. This is what a time machine looks like to me. You got to go 88 miles an hour to get there. I'm not sure if we have to hit that speed with Cloud Rewind, but let's discuss a little bit about what it is and how we're working with it. Anthony, you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, one of the things I like about it when we do a POC with it or discovery is it goes out, you type in the credentials for your cloud environment, your tenant, and it goes out and discovers all of the resources and allows you to see every resource that it has found, discovered, the settings, the information about that resource, and then you can build these groups basically of what a resource, what an application needs to function, whether it's load balancers, other network settings, things to that extent, and build these little pods that you are protecting so that you can protect the application again and everything that application needs to be able to come online.
Yeah, and we call it essentially like a cloud assembly is what the nomenclature in Cloud Rewind is, but essentially it is that application map that maps to all the dependency of the application. And the nice thing about it is a lot of this is automatic. So as you connect to, whether it's AWS, GCP, or Azure, it's automatically mapping out your applications and you build an assembly based on that application itself. And then the other nice thing is as that application changes over time, maybe new, things are spun up or, load balancer changes or something like that. The tool is smart enough to rediscover and make those changes as well. So that's one nice thing is you can actually, as applications evolve over time, you can basically roll it back to a previous point in time. You can see the changes, but it also picks it up as well, which is pretty nice. And that's kind of where it's talking about capturing the infrastructure state and dependencies. So that could be, it could be your network security groups. It could be, your IAM roles. It could be subnet IP settings on the VMs themselves. When you go to when you go to recover, or let's say you recover to a new region or a new account, a lot of those mappings aren't necessarily there. Like if you go to start up an EC2 instance in a new region, for example, you may not have a network security group set up for it, or you may not have all the underlying load balancers for that application either. So this will actually go through the process of setting it up or recovering that data to that new account or new region for you essentially. So it kind of speeds the process of recovering. And that's kind of back to the previous slide when it's talking about the time to recover is sometimes 24 days. The reason why is because the way we in the cloud, the way we isolate workloads and create separate VPCs and subnets, it adds complexity. And so if you have thousands of applications, you add a lot more complexity to the mix. And that's where a tool like this helps out to reduce the time it takes to recover.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
We'll talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about
sorry.
those configurations, those cloud configurations as a
Yep.
whole as we protect them in the next slide. Really, the idea that this is a agentless, right? To Anthony's point, we're typing in our user credentials and it's going out and discovering those things. We're not putting anything on any of your servers. We're not scanning those workloads. It's not going to affect those applications. We're querying the hypervisor, the hyperscaler itself
Yep.
to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing I like about this too is a lot of times you have separation of duties. You have the cloud architect team that is over there, and then you have the infrastructure team that might be still responsible for data protection, DR, cyber resiliency, things like that. And you don't have to be a cloud expert to be able to do the protection and do an out of place recovery to test this out, to prove out DR, that sort of thing. And so it simplifies.
Yeah. And I think, Anthony, in a lot of the use cases that we're seeing and a lot of the success stories, we're actually talking about hybrid organizations, right, that are moving from on-premise into the cloud space. And in those in particular, you end up with very real challenges. Config drift is real, as Tim referenced, we call that configuration drift. And protecting against that is especially critical when the teams running the bulk of the business, the data owners, are not cloud native necessarily, even though all of the tool sets we have to use are.
And then we're also protecting against those sorts of gaps in our coverage from a cyber resilience standpoint with our cloud architects as well. Maybe our cloud architects, in the end of the day, they see this cyber attack and they throw up their hands and they decide they don't want to help anymore. Then what are we doing, right? We have the ability to protect that infrastructure as code in a manner, especially from our infrastructure teams who are used to the backup space. We can protect those things in a similar manner and orchestrate the recovery in the way that we were accustomed to without having to understand a Terraform or understand the dependencies directly as an infrastructure type person, somebody that's not in that swim lane from a cloud perspective.
Well, you bring up a good point,
That's
Patrick.
right.
You bring up a good point, Patrick. I mean, how many people do you want involved in your business continuity and DR planning, right? So if you have tools that allow that group to be able to do that recovery, you don't have the other cloud architects as a dependency to do that recovery. The more people you have, the more the chefs that are trying to build the stew, or you're going to delay that recovery again. So
it's such a strategic need as well, and I think it's a space where Commvault is really thinking ahead of the game as we look at where the industry needs to be to properly support the customer base. We've got a concept in Cloud Rewind called assemblies. We've exported that, if you will, to our Active Directory recovery frameworks as well, so that you've got very carefully targeted run books, full forest recovery, without stepping through the multi-day process that Microsoft has for forest recovery in a true cyber event. Exporting that idea further across the platform means that as we look to cyber and we're offloading all of these configurations to a secure site away from prod where it can be threatened, we're moving the data away from prod where it can be threatened. And where we're headed strategically is this sort of assembly approach that lets us pull the right database and the right VM and the right files with Active Directory in tow, so that recovery overall becomes much more point and click, even in broad challenges like cyber events.
I think one of the other things that we need to address with any SaaS solution is are we meeting our security-based requirements, right? Are we SOC 2 certified? Or do we have those audit controls in place so that we can prove out that nobody has unauthorized access to the ability to access this infrastructure? It's really important, right? And so we built that out, and we make sure that security, again, just like Eagle, is top of mind when we're talking about this sort of thing.
pretty good.
So Yeah. So here's the big slide. This is where we start talking about how we do the things that we do and what the end result is and how we deliver, right? And so we talked a bit about this service being SaaS delivered and agentless, and how it's using those cloud provider APIs to gather some of that data. Um, let's talk a little bit about how we do that in, kind of Azure, AWS. Those are kind of the big ones. Basically, we have these API calls that we can make to protect these portions, these components of our infrastructure as code. And we do that a little differently with each of the cloud providers based on what we have from availability and an API perspective. So like,
Yeah.
for example, like if you're protecting EC2 instances, that VM, we're protecting a VM in EC2. We don't have just a VM, right? We've got the EBS volume, and that volume is mapped to the, as part of the VM storage dependencies. And then in Azure, we may have a web application that's tied to a SQL database, and all these things are interconnected through that VNet, and every connection we have to capture, right? We have to be
Yeah.
able to understand where these connections are, otherwise we can't restore the application.
Yeah, and that's such a key word there, is application, and that's really how we should be thinking of these things. Is from, I'll call it from the top down. As we're looking at, let's say we're recovering a virtual machine, maybe we're doing some files along with that. We want to be able to recover all of the underlying assets necessary to run that application. We're not really talking about taking an entire account, picking it up, wholesale and moving it, because a lot of the underlying assets that we can discover, that we can evaluate and we can categorize for you, don't have APIs that allow us to write them back. So there may be some pre or post scripting for those outliers, but for those fundamental elements that are necessary to the app, bringing in 20%, 50%, 80% of those, and making it a single instance effort to bring it back to life. That's where the acceleration and the power is.
Yeah, and you see that there's obviously a lift and shift approach where you see VMs that have to communicate and it's basic there. But as you become more cloud native, you are using and leveraging that hyperscale specific features, functionality, things like that, that sometimes get overlooked as something that needs to be protected.
Yeah.
And so obviously both things are needed for that plumbing aspect.
Right. Yeah, if you've got auto scaling groups, for example, right? How does that function after an outage, right? Does it function after an outage? Can we continue to provide that scale on demand if we need to? Protecting that configuration is important. The other thing that I think I touched base on the last slide is that this discovery is continuous, it's automatic, and it happens, like I said, continuously. So it allows us to capture any of those configuration changes as they happen. And so that, even if we have a Terraform in place and we do a good job of keeping our baseline up to date inside of that, there's still configuration creep. And again, the fact of the matter is that we need to be able to recover those sorts of things without our primary personnel assets from a cloud perspective.
Yeah.
And there's multiple ways to discover an application too. So it can be via tags. If you have all the application tags, let's say they're across multiple resource groups, you can just have it as a resource group as well. So you can just discover resource groups, and as changes happen, it will automatically map the dependencies underlying that as well.
Yeah, it's a good segue, Tim. Actually, you wanna bring up the interface and kind of walk us through what some of that looks like?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, well, Tim brings that up. Yeah, this idea that we can protect infrastructure is just it's amazing to me. If I could have gone into a physical data center and said I could protect that switch and I could protect that configuration on that port and I could protect the cable that's attached to this server and all those things, the recovery becomes a lot easier, right? And that's how we have to do things in the cloud. It's great
Yeah.
stuff.
I think too, and then Tim, I'm just going to cede the floor to you. Is that we have to think about the difference between what we've achieved in the industry around DR and high availability, and what cyber brings to the table. And we have about 400 catastrophic recoveries in our customer base at Commvault every year. 99% of those are cyber recoveries. DR is easy. You have your warm site, you push things to it, you replicate. it is a known solved problem. And when you're in the cloud, the resilience levels are very high. They're not perfect, but durability is very strong. So, I'm not losing hard drives like I did in 1998 when I started in this game, right? It really is about how do we deal with the unexpected events. And when you're in a cyber scenario, everything you've built for DR is suspect because it's live and it's connected to the prod environment. Those Cisco switches, those Liebert power supplies, if we go back to the on-prem days, those are suspect, right? And those are challenged in a true cyber attack as well. So we really are in the game of moving these configurations out and needing to be able to recover entire sets of data along with the configs around those in a way that we didn't need to 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's a different challenge. And this is a key part of solving for that challenge.
So Chris, you brought up something on that, being able to recover into a different region, typically the way people orchestrate their data is I'm going to protect it and geographically disperse the data. But cloud providers don't go down hard really ever. They just have all these soft outages that they won't tell you is actually an outage, but your application is down. You can't get access to whatever it may be because there's a subcomponent down. So does this allow somebody to essentially re-architect, rethink about the resiliency of their application, where instead of having the hyperscaler try to do this, geographic diversity that doesn't really fail over because the cloud provider doesn't actually down a whole region, this gives them an opportunity to quickly come up in another region that might be fully operational?
Yeah, I mean, it's more about separate accounts, honestly. So it does do replication. I wouldn't market it as we partner with Zerto and we've got our own historic replication capabilities in Commvault. I wouldn't look at it plainly as a simple drop-in replacement for doing DR or HA, but it has some capabilities around that. The bigger value prop there is the acceleration of I'll call it the naked recovery, right? Where we've really lost things. We look at Unilever out in that was not a cyber challenge at all. There were some hyperscaler admins, I think at Google, that torched some accounts, and they needed to be brought back, and Commvault brought them back, right? It's much more about how to cope with that underlying challenge, which is no longer temporary, but we know now it's persistent. I need my data in a safe place, and I need my configs mapped over there too, so I can accelerate that recovery.
Let's give Tim a little.
Tim.
Let's give Tim a little time to demo here.
Yeah. So just from a high level, from Resilience Hub perspective, it shows basically all the resources that I've mapped to within various AWS, Azure, and GCP accounts. So we support all three major cloud providers. This is also a global solution. So basically, wherever GCP or Azure is deployed, it basically supports that region. So there's no regions that aren't supported. But we are segregating your data. So the metadata, I should say itself, we're backing it up into the Cloud Rewind is hosted in GCP. So basically the data itself is hosted in it could be a different cloud from you, but basically if you're in Azure today, the metadata will be hosted within our managed infrastructure in GCP. Just from a connecting, your account to Cloud Rewind, we do what we call a cloud connection, which basically goes through your environment and discovers all the different components within your environment. This isn't necessarily invasive. This is just kind of like a one-time read only. We're not necessarily protecting anything. This is just kind of to discover what services are you running, what regions are they running in, and this will kind of give you a list of the number of network ACLs, SSH key pairs, EBS volumes, etc. In terms of actually protecting the data. Oh, and this also can give you like a list. So basically I can download a report that'll tell me, here's all the resources in this account, for example. And then if I wanted to grab other accounts, I can create a cloud connection for those or other clouds too. So that's another part of that. When you go into the cloud assembly itself, and I loaded this up. Let's see. There we go. And this is kind of the resource map. So it'll give me a summary of the region I'm protecting as well as it being active. And then essentially the resources. This is all the data. So within this account, I built an application map that has, has compute instances, it has RDS instances attached, it has, subnet groups as well as EBS volumes, an SSH key pair. Those underlying components I can see. This is the data, like the key fingerprint, as well as the SSH key type, and essentially this maps it out, and then I can create policies on how often. So this one's only backed up daily, but if I wanted to, back it up, if I want to back it up every 4 hours, if I want to back it up every hour, you have that option too, to basically give you different points in time. And then under repository, this will actually give me all the backups that have been done. I can basically go back to a previous point in time, and this is where you can recover this specific point in time. So, this backup was done, let's say it was done a couple days ago. If I needed to roll back this application to a couple days ago, for example, I could click recover and start that process. I can also do a compare. So basically, if you wanted to look at what has changed over the last few days, I can do a configuration drift analysis, and this will actually pull all the changes that have happened. So let's say an application breaks for some reason, and I just wanted to see, hey, what changed from yesterday, for example. You'd be able to pull this report, and it would tell you exactly what changed in the environment, and you could decide whether, do I want to roll it back or do I want to keep those changes moving forward as well. So pretty granular in that aspect. And then a timeline just kind of gives me the timeline of the snapshots as well.
So truly a change journal type approach, Tim. Is that true? I mean, you're tracking every minute change within that infrastructure, that cloud infrastructure, and being able to roll back and, to your point, do an audit of what's changed in case something breaks.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah. That's awesome stuff. Yeah, the idea that these cloud assemblies are easily discoverable, and going back to the recoverable functionalities, right? We're still going to discover and map those dependencies that we can't yet by API indeed recover, and you'll still have that information. You can use that as ability to build those scripts and everything like that.